Hi, this is Stevie. I have a little sketch that I did when I was sitting in my car waiting for my husband at physical therapy. I had no reference, but I've done lots of sunflowers, so I was just practicing drawing some flowers and some leaves. And I think I turned it into a decent little sketch. And I wanted to paint this today and share my process with you. I'm using a 1/4 inch silver brush, that's a dagger striper, and even though it's small, it holds a lot of water. So I was using it to flick some water onto my sketch to start out, and then I mixed up some of my yellow, or picked up some of my yellow paint, that is Hansa Yellow Medium, and notice how I'm just kind of flicking it randomly around the sketch. And my objective here was to make it look a little loose, to go outside the lines with that yellow, so that when it's all finished it doesn't look like a cutout coloring book sketch. So because I have water on the paper too, I can move that color around a little bit and it softens. You don't see any hard lines here. And it was a challenge that day because when I did this painting it was quite hot. I live in Arizona and I think it was 110 that day, so keeping the paper wet was a challenge. But I'm using that same dagger striper brush to move the color around on the page. And notice that I leave a lot of white spots on the sunflower petals. And that's because I want it to look like highlights when I'm finished. So I'm moving that color randomly, making sure, trying to remember to leave white spaces on the petals. And I sped up here just so you don't get bored, but it's the same process going around these other flowers. Again, keeping some white, preserving some white so they don't get all covered up with color. And adding a little more color where I need it. And you can see how some of that color has spread onto the leaves and how I'll use that to form the leaves here in a few minutes. So adding more color as I need it. That paper is pretty wet, so that color, the color that I spattered on, is going to spread. And this is kind of the foundation for the painting, this yellow that I've added. Now I'm moving to a round brush, and that's a synthetic bristle. I think that's a Princeton, I think a Velvet Touch number 6. And I'm using quinacridone burnt sienna. I'm sorry, it's quinacridone burnt orange to make those centers. It's a lot like burnt sienna. And just moving the color around to create the center. And I left the very center white, but I am going back later to add a dark center, which I never do. And I wanted to try it in this sketch, and I did try it, and I learned that I will never do it again. That's the value of doing something in a sketchbook, is you learn what you want to do or not do without getting into too much trouble. Anyway, I mixed up a color for the very center. I wanted to have a dark center because I had seen some sunflowers with dark centers. So I took some Winsor blue, which is like Prussian blue, and mixed it up with that quinacridone burnt orange. And I'm using it for my leaf color, and then I'll use it on the centers as well. And note how I'm getting that dark color right up against the petals of the sunflowers when I'm forming the leaf, but I don't take it way out to the edges of the leaf. And I had pre-wet that leaf so the color spreads or moves. And I just kind of mingle that color together, but I want that darkest color up toward the petals to call attention to them, but I don't want the entire leaf covered in that color. It just takes away a lot of attention when you do that. So I'm moving around the painting, trying to find all of the areas that are either stems or leaves. And this was a bit like a puzzle as I started to paint it. And at some point it was hard to figure out which was the petal and which was the leaf. But I think it turned out okay, that no one's going to know. So notice how I put on that blue color, and then I immediately rinse my brush and just add water to pull that color out toward the edge of the leaf, but it's much lighter out toward the point of the leaf. And I like how the color mingles together, the blue and the yellow, and that way it doesn't take too much attention away from the flowers, and it calls more attention to the sunflower petals. So I just keep mixing that color. the Windsor blue with the Quin burnt orange. And each time I mix it, it might be a little different, but it doesn't really matter. And I'm getting in those little spots in between that would be like a leaf underneath the sunflower. And there I think I covered up a sunflower petal by mistake, but no one's going to know really. I do like that nice dark color up against the yellow petals. There I'm just doing the same process to cover those little stems at the bottom of the sketch. I don't want to call too much attention to them. I wet those stems first before I added color so that the color wouldn't be too heavy on there. And now I'm going around to the leaf at the top. There wasn't enough yellow color on that one, so I added some yellow, and see how they just mingle together? I don't mix them. Just let it mix on the paper naturally, and the color is so much nicer that way. There's yellow already on most of the leaves, but once it dries, it starts to lighten up, so I do go back and add yellow in places. And I'll do that on the sunflowers too. And here I've got overlapping leaves, 2 leaves that overlap each other, so the way I paint them, I have to make sure that I separate those 2. And I can do that with it is, because I'm using ink, it's already separated, but I like to separate it with color too. They're getting up in between those petals, getting my color up there, blending it out with water. And here I'm at the bottom of the page, and I added more yellow because I don't want that dark color going off the page, and I don't want any hard lines going off the page. So I just really blended it out there with some water at the bottom. And I like that look. And notice that I took some of the leaves and petals right out of the frame. I framed the painting with when I was doing the inking, and I used a Micron 05 pen to do that, which is permanent ink. And but it adds a lot of interest if you can have some objects in your painting going out of the frame. And here I'm just going in the little areas in between petals to add some background color there. And now the dreaded centers, the dark center of each petal, or each sunflower. Normally I paint sunflowers with a bright center. You know, I use quinacridone burnt orange, but I like to leave the center of it light. And I don't really know what possessed me to do this, and the more dark color I put on, the less I liked it. But that's the value of a sketchbook, is that you can play around and experiment. This is all experimental. And you can learn what works for you, what doesn't work, what you like, what you don't like. This is the place to do it, and I encourage you to use a sketchbook if you don't already do that. They're very valuable for this. And even with the dark centers, this painting turned out okay. But I don't think I like it, and I wouldn't do it again. I would leave a light center. So now I'm going to fix up those petals a little bit. The paint has dried and they got pretty light. So I'm going to add a little more color, and now I have a color called, that is Permanent Yellow Deep. And it's like an orange color, but it's Permanent Yellow Deep. And so what I do is I make some lines on the petals with that color. But again, I don't take it out to the edge of each petal. I start the lines back toward the center of the flower, and then notice how I'll make some lines, and then I rinse my brush, and I just use water to pull them out. There I'm creating a little bit of a shape on the petal by adding dark to the very tip of it. Looks like it's turning over. And so I just continue that process. I don't want those hard lines, so I'm sure to go back and use water to pull those lines out, soften them. Look how nice that looks, and it adds a lot of dimension and a lot of interest to the sunflower. And here, where I have that skinny petal in between two others, now you can see that it's added some shape where that one petal looks like it's underneath the other. And that's a nice little trick you can do too. It just gives more dimension and interest to the painting. There, I'm pulling that color out with my water. And I'll go around actually all of the flowers with that same process to add that darker color to it and to create some shadows of petals that are over each other. There I was just using my 1/4 inch brush to clean up some edges. I think I had gotten some of the green leaf paint on that edge, and I just wanted to clean it up. That was a Princeton 1/4 inch synthetic. I think it's a Princeton Velvet Touch brush, and they're nice little brushes for cleanups like that. The bristles are stiff enough that you can pick up color with it. So I continue on around the flower. If I see petals overlapping, then I put that orange color in so that I create some shadows to separate the petals from each other. And I still manage to have some white on those petals. So you can see now that we've got some different values on the petals, you can see the white highlights on some of them. And this is just a sketch. I don't have a clear light source in this painting, but to just leave some areas that have a bit of a highlight is still a really nice look. And there I'm getting, that petal is underneath the one next to it, so I'm getting that shadow in. And now look at that flower compared to the other two on the other side of the sketch. Look how much nicer and more interesting it looks. So now I've sped the video way up to do the same thing to the remaining two flowers, just so that you don't get bored watching this same thing over and over. But you can see I'll just repeat that process to get some color on those sunflowers as well. And it's amazing how much the yellow color lightens up as it dries. Sometimes it almost disappears. And I'm using mostly Winsor Newton paints. My two favorite paints brands are Winsor Newton and Daniel Smith for watercolor. And on the centers of those paintings, I'm going to have to go back and darken them up some more. I hesitate to say that because I didn't like the real dark centers, but what I'm talking about is outside of the dark centers on the part that's just the quinacridone burnt orange. I have to go back and darken that up a bit to create some form to those. Make them stand out a little more. Painting is all about values, dark against light. So if I have the light petals, I need something dark next to them. Starting to really shape up, and I like it so far. I can see things that I need to do yet. One is to get this dark in around the outside of each of those centers, which will create some form if I can. I think I may have wet that first, or I picked up water afterward and wet it very quickly. I don't want any hard edges there. But notice how I get that dark color right around the edges, and then it creates a form for the center so that it looks like the center is standing up a little bit in the flower. It doesn't help those black centers that I have on them, but not too much I can do about that now. Live and learn. And what I was using to go around the outside of those is that same dark color. It was the mix of Winsor Blue and the quinacridone burnt orange. So now I want to work on the background of the painting, and I was just clearing a space. And then I mixed up some cobalt blue, just cobalt blue with some water. And notice how I'm laying down water first. And I'll take it section by section and wet it and then drop in some of the blue color. But where I have yellow, notice that I don't cover up all that yellow. So I lay the blue in randomly and I let that yellow show through. And that creates a much more interesting look than just the solid blue color. And this is the nice thing about line and wash in this kind of a sketch, is you can you can wet a section, work on it, and then move on to the next section, because where I live in Arizona, the paper dries really fast. So this is a nice way to avoid that problem. Just work on one section at a time. And the ink lines create those natural sections. Just be sure to get them all. Some are pretty tiny, like that one in the corner. You just have to stare at your painting a while to make sure that you get them all. And the blue looks so nice against the yellow petals. Blue and yellow is just a really nice combination. And I think I've gotten all the spaces there. There we go. And it's really starting to look very nice, but I do need to do a little more work on the leaves. And that is to get some more attention, some dark color to call attention to those sunflower petals. So I picked up more of my Winsor blue and some Quinburn orange on my brush. I didn't necessarily mix them, I just picked up one and then picked up the other. And notice how I'm keeping the leaf very wet. So I put the color up toward the petals, and then I rinse my brush and just use water to pull that color out. But then notice what that does. It leaves the tip of the petal is still quite yellow, which is a nice look. So your dark color is up, pointing to your center of interest, your flowers. And then as you move out toward the edge of the page, the dark color starts to fade. So that it's starting to look really nice. And what I was doing there was just flicking on some, spattering it with some yellow color, some of my permanent yellow, Hansa yellow medium. I just like the look of the spatter, and it tends to liven it up a bit. My paper had dried, so I had to spritz it with a little bit more water to get some color on there. And I'm not thrilled about those black centers of the sunflowers, but overall I think it's a pretty cute little sketch. I like the spattering. So I would call it successful. And I hope that you learned something from this, and I hope my tips are helpful. And if you like this video, please think about subscribing. I did add one touch after I did the video, and that was to add some orange dots with a gel pen at the very end to help liven up those centers. And I think that helped a little bit. Thanks so much for watching.